Welcome to Law Awareness Weeks at CDC 2024. This webinar is part of Law Awareness Weeks at CDC 2024. It is a collaboration between Bono SG, the 5 Community Development Councils, National University of Singapore Faculty of Law, Singapore University of Social Sciences School of Law, Singapore Management University School of Law, the Singapore Corporate Counsel Association Pro Bono Chapter, and the Singapore Association of Social Workers, supported by the People's Association. I am Serene Gan and the moderator for this session. Today's webinar is Be CyberSafe. First, some housekeeping matters. Today, we'll be using Pigeonhole Live for our Q&A session. You can submit your questions at any point during the webinar and also upvote on any questions that interest you. If you have a smartphone or a tablet with you, just launch your internet browser and enter www.pigeonhole.at into the address bar. Next, key in our event passcode, which is passcode as shown on the slide. Alternatively, you can click on the link shared in the chat function to launch Pigeonhole Live on your device. If you're viewing this webinar on your desktop or laptop, you should receive an invitation to launch Pigeonhole. Please note that today's discussion is not intended to substitute any form of professional legal advice. If you require specific legal advice, please consult a lawyer. And with that, I would like to introduce our panelists for today's webinar, Jeffrey Lim and Genie Sugene Gan. Genie Sugene Gan heads up Kaspersky Public Affairs in the Asia-Pacific and Middle East, Turkey, and Africa regions, where she is responsible for developing trusted relations with government and institutional stakeholders for the company while integrating the business, communications, and public policy strategies. She frequently speaks on international platforms and is a thought leader in topics surrounding public policy and the intersection of technology and policy. She holds a JD, an honors degree in accountancy, and a specialist diploma in counseling psychology. Called to the Singapore Bar, she's also a mediation coach at the Singapore Mediation Centre and a mediator at the Singapore International Mediation Institute. Jeffrey Lim is a lawyer specializing in data governance, cybersecurity, privacy, and artificial intelligence. His clients include global e-commerce multinationals and technology companies. He was an in-house counsel at a global technology company where he managed a data privacy compliance program for East Asia, ANZ, and India. Jeffrey is the chair of the Law Society's Cybersecurity and Data Protection Committee and legal advisor to the Singapore Computer Society. He has written articles on data protection published by the PDPC and is the lead writer for a legal chapter in the SCS IMDA AI Ethics Body of Knowledge. He is a former chair of the Law Society's Project Law Help Committee and remains active in pro bono work. Jeffrey and Genie, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
We will first kick off our session with a presentation by Genie. Genie, please.
Thank you, Serene. So I'm going to share some slides and you should see them on screen. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here to, share about some of the cybersecurity trends in Singapore and beyond, not just dealing with businesses and organizations which we frequently engage with, but also individual consumers and users of digital devices, right? And that is something that you and I will all be affected because not too long ago, really, cybersecurity is something that is only in the advanced field where experts, right, technical experts will be engaged in as a topic. But of course, with digitalization and the prevalent use of mobile devices, especially post-pandemic, so this is a good time to be talking about this. It is becoming rapidly relevant for everyone, right? So I'm actually going to move on in my slides and share some relatable examples that our researchers from my company have managed to pick up along the way from around the world. So first of all, you will see on this slide a cat and a pet feeder. So really, in short, the story goes like that. True story, of course, that we have found in recent times that pet feeders have been and can very well become vulnerable by being hacked into, such that it is used to spy on homes. Now, for those who are pet owners, you probably will be aware that basically pet feeders will dispense food and drink for your pets at regular intervals to ensure that they don't starve and they don't go thirsty, especially when you're away on a business trip whatsoever, or you're not at home working most parts of the day. So this is becoming worrying, right? If a pet feeder, which is completely innocuous, can be used and exploited to spy on homes after being compromised, right? And in the next slide, this is another example which I think Singaporeans can relate to. It's I call this the bubble tea example, right? So there was a lady from Singapore who was actually buying a drink from a bubble tea stall, right, in Singapore, when she came across, again, innocuously, a QR code which invited her to take a survey for a free drink. And this is something that is harmless, and what harm can it do, right? It's just a survey, and let's just do it. It takes no more than a minute. So she scanned the QR code with a phone camera. She pointed at it and she accessed the link, but nothing came on actually after scanning a QR code. What she didn't realize is that the QR code had led to a link that downloaded what we call a keystroke logger. Please just bear with me if some of the terminologies that I use get too technical. Yeah. And in the middle of the night, she went home, had a bubble tea, went home. In the middle of that night, the attacker actually had managed to obtain all of her passwords and gotten into her bank account and stolen 20,000 Singapore dollars. It's quite a tidy sum for an almost zero effort by the cyber attacker, right? So she actually missed the bank's notices because it happened when she was asleep, and the attackers actually designed it precisely for it to happen that way, right? And so no one really is safe anymore, and cybersecurity awareness must be present at all levels. That's my main takeaway. In my next example, in the next slide, this is also, again, something which can affect anyone. It's actually about wedding invitations, right? I mean, I frequently receive invites to weddings, and this is something that when I read about this from our researchers, I was telling myself I must be very, very vigilant. And this also illustrates, as I tell the story, of the danger of using mobile devices. So in this example, and I think we all know that Malay weddings are typically huge events, right? I've been invited to several over the course of the last decade or so. Like colleagues, friends, and all that would have invited me, and usually the big weddings, right, up to thousands of invitations. Now, cyber attackers actually have made use of this to embed malicious links in the wedding invites. Yeah. And once the invitation link was opened, the link will download an Android package kit asking for users' permissions to read the device's SMSs or, messages, instant text messages, right? The attacker then requests for a new WhatsApp OTP via SMS. You want to access the invite, so you may not suspect too much, and you will give the OTP. And then it takes over the WhatsApp account of the victim. Yeah. Now, this is possible because people accept having to pay for antivirus for desktops and laptops, but often not so, not as accepting for paying for antivirus software to be installed in their mobile devices. They don't think very much about it. But actually, if you think about it, most of us use how much screen time do we spend on our mobile devices as opposed to screen time on our desktops or our laptops, right? So actually, it's a bit counterintuitive. We should be taking care of our security on our mobile devices as well, if you ask me. So mobile devices are arguably a lot more threatened now. There are phishing exercises, and I think we're going to be discussing that later on during the scenario discussion, so I won't go too much into that. And, you know, people actually need to be aware of the risk of data loss, right, from mobile devices, and this is something to bear in mind. Now onto my next slide. I'm going to move on from these examples, which were fairly local, to general trends that we observe internationally. I mean, I come from a global company, and I think I need to use this opportunity to share a little bit more beyond just the local context, because it may not be something that's prevalent in Singapore right now, but I mean, God forbid, it may be something that affects us in time to come. And this is ransomware, right? So before I go into the story itself, I maybe should just describe what a ransomware is, because not everyone is familiar. A ransomware actually is a malware that holds a victim's sensitive data or device at hostage, and then it demands a ransom in exchange for the encryption key needed to regain access to affected data or the use of the infected device. Yeah, so it will lock the data or lock the device, and permanently does so, so that the victim does not have access to his or her own personal data unless he or she pays a ransom, right? Well, money, right? So it then encrypts the files on the device to ensure that the victim himself, the data owner, does not have access. And then it takes advantages, of course, of vulnerabilities in the user's computer and other computers to propagate throughout the organization or the victim's network. Now, these days, and you would see on the slide, it actually has to do with ransomware as a service, right? RaaS. Because cyber criminals actually today are getting more and more sophisticated, and they are now even offering ransomware as a service. So they're operating like a business. And in case you don't have the expertise, you are a bad guy, you don't have the expertise to launch a ransomware attack, you can actually engage their services, basically outsource it to them, right? So ransomware as a service is operating increasingly like a business, as I've mentioned. And an example is Lockbit, a rather famous ransomware group, which actually provides 3 different business plans. It's like, you know, a telco mobile plan. It has 3 different business plans for you to choose from in engaging their services. So in one case that we came across, a cyber criminal gang had even used a bug bounty for vulnerabilities discovered in its ransomware as a service. What this means is that if there are bugs in the ransomware, you can report it to them for a reward for helping them improve on the ransomware's quality and effectiveness. And such bug bounty programs are actually what legitimate software companies, such as, you know, the one that I work for, usually offer for people who report a bug that we can fix, right? So we give them a reward for reporting. Thank you for the service, right? So these days, criminals are operating more and more like legitimate software companies. In my following slides, I thought I should touch a little bit on AI. Because AI has become so prevalent, and really it's a double-edged sword when it comes to cybersecurity, right? Because and I've put it out in my next slide that and this is my CEO saying that, you know, the good news is that we use AI to detect malware, and the bad news is that cyber criminals also use it for their purposes. They exploit it, the environment using AI. And AI can therefore be utilized in various ways by cyber defenders such as us. It can also be abused in various stages of an attack operation. And I go into a little bit more detail in my next slide very quickly. Basically, based on social engineering and data they collect on users' behavior and preferences and what they are likely to click on, for instance, they actually, you know, use AI to inject vulnerabilities into systems and networks and devices. But then there are also ways that AI have been used by the good guys, right, to provide better cybersecurity, such as the examples that I've listed in the second and third point, in incident response and prevention and detection and response from a cybersecurity point of view, right? Now, in my next section, I will really talk about how, well, I think I should talk about ChatGPT maybe, yeah? So I think we all know the world went into a flurry, really, with ChatGPT, I think sometime in the last 2 years, right? Of course, it's existed before that, but it's really gotten very popular in very recent times. And a lot of chatter has been going around, and people have been using it, right? Even at the workplace and in schools and all that, and such that teachers now have to check for plagiarism. Because I think ChatGPT was deemed to be a technological milestone, right? With far-reaching benefits for many users around the world, easy to use and access, and also to a large extent free, right? But with every of these advancements, obviously comes with unintended consequences, what I call costs to society, to our security, right? And with ChatGPT in its multiple iterations by now, its underlying technologies are growing really fast, and it is becoming even more effective as a tool and more easily exploited by cyber criminals, right? So you would see on this slide that an attacker actually can ask ChatGPT to generate offensive tools, right? And script to automate their operation. So it's a simple question, and they get the answer to allow the attackers to be able to program it according to what they wish, right? And of course, then there is phishing with the help of AI in my next slide, where AI can actually help threat actors in performing phishing attacks by automating and enhancing various aspects of the process, right? They can, and we actually will, on the right-hand column you see on those bullet points, and I believe Serene will be taking us through some of the scenario discussions later on also, and basically these relate to deepfakes, right? Whether it's voice or it's visual, to produce images of people that you trust, for you to think that I am someone that you trust, someone that you're familiar with, yeah, or I sound like someone whom you trust and that you're familiar with, that, and through that exploit that opportunity to conduct effective phishing and to be able to phish for personal data, financial information, or, basically with profiteering in mind. Now, also in the next slide, you would see that I can also very simply use ChatGPT to craft a phishing email and to design a phishing web page, right? You can see from the screen that this is how it can be easily achieved. And of course, what do we do right now that our world, that the world that we exist in has become so complicated, so complex, so perplexing? Right. I always say that we should always remain hopeful. And I think this is what Law Awareness Week is all about, for everyone to become more vigilant, to know what are some of the existing trends globally and locally, and to be more alert to such attacks. And we will talk a little bit more about the remedies later on during the seniors discussion. So this is just a touch and go. In my next slide, I do want to start offering a solution already, right? So no more ransom is something that I put out on my slide. It's actually an old program that we've been having for the last 8 to 9 years already. It's something that started by the Dutch National Police, Europol, McAfee, and Kaspersky, which is my company. It's a No More Ransom project, which is a non-commercial initiative where we actually provide free decryption tools should someone be hit by a ransomware attack. Right. And the website actually is available in 37 languages, definitely English and 36 other languages. So it's available for all for free. And to date, actually, it's been about 8 years since our launch. I don't have the most recent figures, but as of the end of last year, just 9 months ago, that had been more than 360,000 downloads of our decryption tools already, which translated to helping 2 million or more victims decrypt their devices without having to pay the ransom. The people who basically were caught by the ransomware attacks, right? So my bottom line really is do not pay the ransom. We will have access to tools which you don't have to pay money for, and that doesn't require you to part with your money in order. And because the ransomware attackers will be asking you for 4-figure, 5-figure, and sometimes depending on the value of your perceived value of your data, ask for even 6-figure amounts, right? So it's very hefty. Plus also, if you answer them by paying the ransom, you're actually feeding them with incentives to continue in their ways, right? So we don't want to encourage them. So do not pay ransom. Now, next, let me share very quickly, because this gets a little bit technical and it's more interesting for maybe people who are from larger organizations, those amongst you, because this is something a little bit more niche in terms of capability that we have. It is something called digital footprint intelligence, right? DFI. Where actually companies seek DFI intelligence to see what is mentioned about them online, and it includes like data leaks, monitoring the dark web, 24/7 service, and also detecting fraudulent activity. So there are actually a lot of these dark web monitoring that help companies identify if cyber gangs are targeting them. So it is very good for organizations to use services such as this to prevent an attack, because that is, I guess, what you call akan datang, coming soon. You want to prevent it, right? Yeah. So this is for organizations with some financial resources. You can consider such sophisticated threats monitoring to help you. But also, of course, as a baseline, and this is my last slide, education and training is always a good start. Yeah. And so I always advocate education, training of employees in organizations, and even schools have started teaching about cybersecurity among high schools, right? And sometimes also in primary schools. So during COVID, actually, we collaborated with the Singapore government to actually roll out some materials for children between the ages of 6 to 12 with something quite interesting. I'm not sure if you can see it on screen. Yeah, this is actually children's storybook, which we specially wrote and designed to educate children in a fun way about cybersecurity and to help them raise awareness from a very young age. So I am leaving a few copies at the pro bono office. So anyone that's interested, you can maybe email them and pick up your free copy while stocks last, of course. Yeah. So with that, I will hand the time back over to Serene.
Thank you, Genie. That was very eye-opening, especially listening about that there's now services or ransomware. Not encouraging anyone to do that, but it is very eye-opening. I'd like to now hand over the time to Jeffrey to share about the rise of weaponized AI.
Yep. Thank you, Serene. And yeah, that was incredibly eye-opening. That was one of those things that made me sit up and go, okay, I have a lot to catch up on. And that's the problem with this this space, isn't it? Things keep moving all the time so quickly. So this is provocatively titled The Rise of Weaponized Gen AI. But and it is one of the topics we will cover certainly in this next part of the presentation. But I think maybe just to start things off, you know, in my next slide, I'm going to show you basically some basic legal obligations which have already been with us for about 10 years, where organizations are essentially which are engaged in collecting, using, or disclosing your personal data. There were already certain laws in place, namely, for example, the Personal Data Protection Act, or the PDPA, which imposes a number of obligations on organizations. And this is important and reassuring to most of us in the sense that if you're going to be engaged in collecting, using, and disclosing personal data, there will be certain legal expectations of the organizations. So it's good to know that at one level, businesses, organizations, and whether it's not-for-profit, whether even if it's an organization that was formed out of, you know, very loosely, like interest groups that get together. There is a certain amount already of legal obligations that are in place, and it does act ultimately to raise the standards. And you can see on the slide that actually there's a number of these obligations. There are 12 listed here, and that's one of the basic things. And it's important to recognize that the law ultimately does set these obligations out in society, and that gives a certain degree of reassurance to users. So that's meant to encourage us to engage and continue to, use the internet and all the services there with some level of trust. So, and in my next slide, I think, you'll see that ultimately these legal frameworks have been actively used, mostly by a lot of individuals who have had experiences, negative experiences, with organizations that have fallen short of the mark. And in some cases, these were situations where the organization did everything they could reasonably to secure your data. But at the end of the day, some defenses were not just complete, they couldn't protect you. But ultimately, these led to complaints and inquiries. And in these situations, you'll see that the figures on the screen will tell you that ultimately it's been an avenue of redress, it's an avenue of investigations, ways to sort of take action should something go south. And that is just one of the forms. The good news is, as you go along in this part of the presentation, you'll see that more avenues to report and to remedy have come up. Now, the next slide really then is where we go to a really scary part of it. I came across this article some time ago, and it's every mother's nightmare. Right. In this story, it was reported that a woman received essentially a message from a kidnapper. And the kidnapper basically played an audio clip, or basically said, look, I have your daughter. And then, he presumably offered the daughter to speak on the phone. And the very convincing audio telling the mom that she's been kidnapped. And it was very convincing. In fact, the mother said that every mother knows their child, and yet she could tell immediately this was her voice. Now, there's a little bit more to the story than this, but ultimately she got frantic. She was told that she had to raise money for a ransom, and it was so convincing what she heard that she began to panic. As it turned out, she was able to, through other relatives like her other children, got in touch, and ultimately the daughter found out that there was something going on, and she called the mom, and basically they found out that it was a fraud, it was a scam, and the daughter was actually safe. But what was terrifying was that until that discovery happened, she actually thought the child was really in danger. And for the rest of the story, the interesting thing was that one thing the mother noted was that she knew the daughter well. And one of the things about her daughter that she knew was that she was actually quite a calm person. And so it didn't gel with her that the daughter would be crying for help and all that, and losing it. So it was one of those interesting signatures where you kind of knew this person in a way that the purported kidnappers did not. So that was a little bit of dissonance as well when she received this threat. So it turned out that there were certain giveaways in the long term. But imagine if you were the mom, right? You have this really shocking, this really terrifying thing that comes upon you. So what do? And that unfortunately is being enabled by Gen AI. So the next slide, you can actually see that it's discovered that Gen AI models essentially are being trained to use the data that's publicly available. In this case, it turns out that the likelihood is that the kidnappers actually went to social media and collected files or recordings and stuff that from the various social media accounts, whatever is publicly available. And it turns out you don't need a lot in order to train these Gen AI solutions. They can actually pick up as little as apparently as little as a minute of audio is enough for them to train the Gen AI to reproduce the voice of the person, of the victim, or the purported kidnappee. And so at the end of the day, this technology is out there, and it's also fairly cheap. The article also tells us that you can get some of these solutions for as little as $5 a month. And of course, Genie already told us that, you also have this whole supply chain, this whole ecosystem of people who are offering, like a business, all the solutions available to these malicious actors. So it does tell us a little bit about how, we need to begin to be more aware of these type of risks. And in the next slide, you kind of pick up the fact that, well, in this age where we are very eager to share our social status, to share our experiences with our friends, we are actually, to some extent, unwittingly posting training material for the malicious Gen AI solutions to actually learn to mimic you. So it's very important that if you have loved ones and you yourself are practicing certain amount of care, you should sort of take some time to think about how you should filter the content, how you should place certain privacy safeguards around what you share, so that to the extent that you can, the content that you share goes out to as trusted an audience as possible, right? Now, the law is engaged with many social media platforms, many of these channel areas. There are many other laws besides the PDPA that have come online, and they are going to impose standards on these organizations to set up as much as they can protections, right, for to increase the level of security in the content and the people who are using it. But there's a limit to what all these laws can do, and ultimately, you have to be aware that it's kind of a race against, like an arms race of sorts. If you set up one set of protections on one platform, the fraudsters are going to try and overcome that, and so on, and that doesn't really end. So in the next slide, we really do need to think about the personal responsibility that we all take. So responsible platforms will do what they can to raise the standards, and the laws will be evolving as quickly as they can to try and address these risks and issues. Ultimately, we individually, each of us individually, bear a personal responsibility to take the right steps to protect ourselves. And, this article just tells you basically, if data privacy was so important, why do we click agree on user agreements without reading? And, this has been an endemic problem for a very, very long time, right? We don't seem to have the capacity to focus on what's really important to us. I can tell you, for example, the lawyers themselves are the worst lawyers for themselves, right? We never read our contracts, right? And we pour over the client's contracts, but we're not that good at taking care of ourselves. But that attitude does need to change, and all of us individually need to take some responsibility to think about how we're going to use electronic platform services and what kind of options we have. So if we go to the next slide, this will tell you a little bit about how the law has been beefing up in multiple ways. So we talked about the PPA at the start of this earlier my segment. You'll see that there have been further amendments to various other laws. Now, the first one I've listed there, the amendments, the Corruption, Drug Trafficking, and the Serious Crimes Confiscation of Benefits Act. That's really a law that's meant to address, among other things, the collection and use of proceeds illegally gained, right, from criminal activity. And there have been amendments to beef up the legal remedies available and the powers of the authorities to get into and learn and detect, right, the flow of legal proceeds. Then the next line was the updates to the Computer Misuse Act. Not too long ago, the act was also updated to address essentially what Genie was mentioning, which some of the supply chain activities in the dark web and all that, including the sale of personal data for malicious purposes and so on. And that's really to enable authorities, prosecution, to bring legal consequences to bear on anyone that they can in fact apprehend for breach of these laws. And then there's in the third major bullet point there, you'll see that there's a bunch of other laws that have come up, right? And they all have different angles. So the Protection from Harassment Act, for example, does have some support for, among other things, doxing, misuse of, cyberbullying and cyberstalking. The Online Criminal Harms Act is where you get to the platforms. You notice that the platforms themselves now are raising their standards. It does come to some extent from that as well. And the ability to take down harmful content. And then there's, of course, the Protection for Online Falsehoods and Manipulation Act, which deals with the malicious or rather misinformation that damages the public interest. So these laws are coming along. They are being filled up. There are more dimensions now to protect the public, but it doesn't detract from the fact that we individually still owe ourselves, right, the responsibility and obligation to take good care of our own cyber health. So the next slide, you'll see that the law's amendments continue apace. And this is an important development. For those of you who are concerned about having your accounts hacked or being duped into a scam and money's come out of you and that you're sent, you know that, oh my gosh, I just realized I got duped and I'm trying to stop the flow of funds. Well, the good news is that apparently the Singapore Police Force is thinking about how they can enhance their ability to, for example, stop the flow of funds. Right, and that's under review. But if it does happen, it would create a real practical benefit for those who are scammed. And then the next slide, the other point to recognize is at the organizational level, you'll see that there are increasingly tools available, right, which allow you to mitigate against risks. So Genie, for example, comes from an organization that arms organizations with resources and technologies to combat this type of malicious activities. And at the end of the day, you can begin to acquire and use appropriate security solutions to add to your level of protection that you have. It's fundamental now. I don't know how many of us are still using handphones and mobile devices without appropriate, basic antivirus protections. You should at least start thinking about those to some degree. And then in the next slide, you'll see there are even publicly available tools and reputable ones. So, for example, Scam Shield is put out by the Singapore Police Force. It's actually pretty useful. I use it myself, and I have picked up a good number of alerts. Now, over time, what happens is you start identifying these scams yourself, and you're being reinforced by what you're told by Scam Shield. You're also educating yourself. So there's an interesting virtuous cycle here, in the sense that as you use these scams, you're also being taught to better detect these type of phishing efforts. At the end of the day, part of the individual responsibility is not just to stay informed and to read the things that you're asked to click to, but also stay on top of it, right? So all the news the stories that we're sharing, it's not really meant to terrify you. It's really to tell you that, look, there are things that are happening right now. Stay on top of it. And then at the same time, you will find there are also good sources of information and resources and knowledge that you can use to allow yourself to protect yourself against all these developments. In the next slide, we do talk a bit about legal recourses and avenues. These are on this slide, you'll see that there are certain reporting links that you can use for reporting a breach of the PPC. If you have if you believe that there's a scam going on in terms of, you can reach out to the Singapore Police Force, and that's a link there. And the CSA, the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, also has a place as well where you can send emails to alert them as to potential scams that have occurred, right? And at the end of the day, all the key service providers that you're using, whether it's health, financial institutions that you work with, government agencies, stay on top of what they're saying, right? They will send you occasional updates. They will tell you things like, we never send or ask you to collect data in a certain way, and so on. And so be aware, right? Just be aware and take the effort to understand what's going on. Okay, so on that, I think I'll turn it back to Serene.
Thank you, Jeffrey. We'd like to go to our first scenario. Sarah receives a message from a WhatsApp account which shows her boss's name and profile photo. Her boss tells Jane that as her colleague Adam is on medical leave, he needs her to send a letter of customer names and contact and biodata over WhatsApp. Jane did so and later found out that it was a scammer which took her boss and colleague information and photos from the internet. It is unknown to Sam on what the scammer did with the customer information. So Jeffrey, what should Jane do in such a situation?
Well, that's a good question. And in fact, I think there was in fact a live scenario where an employee was in fact tricked into transferring monies, for example. And maybe, Jeannie can talk a bit about that live situation that happened. But to start with, if you think about this phishing scenario, what happened was an individual tried to reach out and pretended to be her boss, but using a number, right, to
Yep.
reach out to her and asking her to send a whole series of categories of information. On the one level, because it's a work-related type of situation, you will find that the law will impose certain duties on the company itself. Right, the company itself should have taken steps, for example, to insist that all employees use approved channels of communication, to ensure that there are appropriate standards when they share information or release it. So in one sense, it's not hard to see how this organization might be called out for failing, basic security requirements under the PDPA, for example. In terms of what will happen to her personally, she is an employee of the company, so to some extent, there's no individual personal liability in this regard. But obviously, it's not good to be the source of the leak in every organization. So I'll just stop there, maybe.
Sure. So would that mean that the organization is responsible for her actions?
So she does represent or operate as an employee of the organization. So the organization, it's only really good as the individuals who are actually working for them. So the fact that that one fell short, the organization is going to have to show that she was a rogue employee, or that they had done everything they could except that the employee just didn't follow instructions and so on. So yes, unfortunately, if they can't meet the standard of showing that they were making the appropriate safeguards, then unfortunately the organization does have to bear some responsibility.
Given that she shared customer information, is there any obligation to notify the authorities or even tell the customers, even though she doesn't know what happened to the information after that?
Yes, okay, thank you for that. It's important to recognize that there are reporting obligations get triggered if certain thresholds are met. So, for example, if more than 500 individuals' data is compromised, then you would have to report to the PDPC. And if the biodata that we talked about was sensitive enough, it might cause significant harm. And there's certain classes of data that are automatically considered harm, like financial information and so on. If that happens, then the company also has to report to the PDPC, but even if it's just one individual that's affected. And so there's a timeline that's involved. You have to report within a certain amount of time, basically 48 hours from when you determine that this was a reportable breach. And then so you have to use one of the links that I showed you in terms of the reporting obligations. The PDPC itself may also say that, look, because of the nature of the compromise, we also need to make sure that the individuals are alerted that their data has been compromised so that they can take appropriate steps. So it may not just end with you reporting to the PDPC, you may also need to reach out to the affected individuals as well.
Thanks, Jeffrey. We have a question from the audience member that can the organization take action against its employee for causing this sort of damage?
Well, that's a thorny one. Okay, so at the end of the day, as an employee, they owe an obligation to perform their duties.
Yes.
Right. So, if anything, in terms of action, it would be disciplinary actions that be called out according to your HR standards and everything that you have in place. I hesitate to say that the employee is personally liable to the employer. It's not as clear as that would always be the case. And don't forget, if the employer failed to actually train or ensure certain SOPs are in place, there's a lot of complicity there.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Important reminder to employers to make sure you put the proper processes in place. So I did guess, times have changed. And Jeannie, in the past, when you're working in the office, your boss would just walk over to you and tell you and give you instructions. But nowadays, with flexi working, more and more companies are using online or other mediums to communicate with employees. So what's your thoughts on how to reduce such risks of such incidents?
And it's an excellent question, but I thought I wanted to add a little bit to what Jeff said earlier on to whether, the company can actually hold the employee responsible. So I think he answered whether you can, right? So it depends a lot also on the company policy, and the company also owes it, owes it to the employee to make sure that he's properly trained and all that. But a lot of times, from a practical point of view, and not just reading the letter of the law, you have to also ask yourself, should you sue your employee? And if you do, and the monetary loss is a very hefty amount, which you know for sure that the employee cannot afford to be paying you, what good does it do for you to spend money on litigation only to recover nothing, right? So it's not about whether you can. I think we've answered that. It's also about whether you should, right? So I think prevention is always better than cure. So to take a practical standpoint, and your legal advisor, when you consult them, will be able to advise you properly on that, is also to take a more pragmatic approach to this. Now, coming to Serene's question, I think, basically based on tips on how, in regard to tips on how to reduce the risk of such incidents, I always say it comes down to AI, right? And I don't mean artificial intelligence, which we've been spending most of our time talking about today, but it's about A for authentication. And second, of course, I is for instincts. Let me explain a little bit. Yeah. Now, I think also Jeff alluded to this just now, and thank you for that prompt. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Just this year, there was this big brouhaha all over the news in Singapore as well about a finance department worker in an MNC in Hong Kong being tricked into paying out $25 million, 25.6, I think, $million to fraudsters using deepfake technology to pose as the company's CFO. Yeah, I'm looking down because I'm referring to the actual news link about this. Yeah, and this was something that was reported by the Hong Kong police speaking to the media. The scam was pretty elaborate, right? Because the finance department employee actually was duped into attending a video call. Listen carefully, it was a video call where you could see faces and all that, with what he thought were several other members of staff. So it wasn't just the CFO, there were other people also on the call. So what are the chances that they're all fake, right? But as it turned out, basically they were all deep fake creations. So it was a multi-person call and all of them were fake. Yeah. So in this multi-person video call, it turns out that everyone was fake, and therefore this employee from the finance department who was initially suspicious, right? And so that was his instincts. I'm telling about AI now, yeah. I for instincts, right? He had those instincts, but he didn't quite trust his instincts. He trusted his eyes, right? So what happened was that he received a message, right, even before this video call, from his CFO, who was based in the UK, to attend this call, and with this request to transfer this secret transaction to be carried out. Yeah, for this, and he put aside his earlier doubts about the video call because he thought, there are multiple people who looked like they were legit and looked and sounded like his colleagues, but it was all deepfake all the way, deepfake visuals, deepfake audio, right? So believing everyone else on the call was real, he actually agreed to remit a total of 200 million Hong Kong dollars, which of course translated, that's how I got my number, more than 25 million Singapore dollars, yeah, to the fraudsters. So, and this is alarming, right? the dollar amount is alarming, and also how elaborate this scam could go. So you sometimes have to practice A and I, right? Authenticate, right? I had a personal experience, not me, but my family. And my uncle, actually, Uncle Alan, I call him, he actually received a phone call from Uncle Ken, who actually, no, sorry, it wasn't a phone call, it was a WhatsApp message to basically ask. So it was Uncle Ken's number, the profile picture, exactly this scenario, yeah? Asking for 6,000. Technically not that much. I mean, it's not $25 million. And it's something that Uncle Alan would have. And then he said that he needs to make some payment, advance, whatever, and is overseas and therefore needs help. He'll come back to Singapore and repay him. Uncle Alan didn't feel very right about this, and he used his instincts, right? And then he decided to call my mom, who also knows Uncle Ken. Hope you're following, because there are 3 people in this story. And then, but I'll stop at 3. Okay, so he called my mom, and my mom said that, my mom also used her instincts, right? So it was very good teamwork. She said, let me call Uncle Ken's home, right? So she called Uncle Ken's home and spoke to Ken's wife and said that, just wondering, is Ken at home? Can we speak with him? And they said, oh no, he's not at home, but I'll get him to call you back. And of course, Ken called my mom back, and then they managed to verify that it was a fraudster, right? And in fact, he got locked up from his mobile device just that morning. And so his mobile device actually got taken over, right? So I think this is very simple, and it rings home, right? So please authenticate where you can. You definitely can, actually. And secondly, you have instincts, use them, right? And when you use them, basically trust them, right? Yeah. So
Thanks, Jeannie. That's a very handy acronym to remember: AI, authentication, and trust your instincts. That brings us to our next scenario on malware. Sam, he created a cat fan club on social media where cat lovers would share cute photos and videos. He downloaded a cute cat video on his handphone and forwarded it to his friends and family. Later, he discovered that the video had malware, and with control of his phone, fraudsters sent messages to his contacts to ask for monies, which may be a little bit reminiscent of the scenario that Ginny that shared. But, Jeannie, I guess I'm a little surprised because I thought malware was for computers. Is it common nowadays for there to be malware for phones?
well, to be honest, I think psychologically, people don't think of protecting their mobile devices, right? I think I alluded to that very early on during my presentation just now at the start of the webinar. And actually, based on our statistics, only less than 25%, which means fewer than 1 in 4 people actually would protect their mobile devices with some kind of antivirus. And that is really the baseline, right? To have an AV software running in your device. And that is so few, less than 1 in 4. And people don't, people could have been using their CDC vouchers to be paying for for this. And the cost of protecting mobile devices is pittance, right? But people have no qualms paying for an expensive meal in the restaurant. So I think sometimes we need to have our priorities right. Mobile devices are arguably a lot more threatened today for reasons such as, number 1, what do we use our mobile phones for? Mobile banking, right? Potential financial loss if the data is compromised, right? You basically save your contacts, right? Your loved ones, family, friends, external contacts, whatsoever, they're all there. And a lot of your personal data are actually on the phone, right? And your email as well. I'm sure you access your email. And more often than not, we access our work emails as well, right? And for us, we've got customers, clients, whatsoever, and our customers and clients' data are there as well, right? As a result. So there are a lot of sensitive data which are with us, carrying in our back pockets everywhere we go. So don't underestimate the value of the data and the information that you save inside your mobile phones, and you really need to safeguard them. The second thing is that we need to actually make sure that we don't just frivolously download every mobile app that there is. For me, there are a lot of times where, you know, you go to a restaurant and they ask you to download the app for a $5, $10, even $50 voucher, right? And of course, you have to download it, show them. But I would be very slow to do that because the good deal may only last for that moment, but the potential consequences, often, of course, we're talking about negative ones, yeah, can last for a long time, longer than you would like to remember it. Yeah. So I think generally we need to be a little bit more vigilant, yeah, and also especially for those of us who are working off our mobile phones a lot, working remotely. Now I think it's trending because ever since the pandemic, actually not many people go back to the office anymore, or even if you do, it's on a hybrid format. And a lot of times we're sitting in a cafe, tapping on the free Wi-Fi without a VPN to surf the webmail or to use our mobile app to access work emails with very personal and secret information, actually. I would suggest that we be very slow to and be very slow to, you know, take these very, I think, risky steps and to be more vigilant, actually. So Sam, who joined a cat fan club on social media, you know, I mean, obviously that's his interest. I think it's he, not Samantha, right? It's Sam.
Yes.
Yeah. He discovered that the video had malware and all that. I think really what he should do is, first of all, of course, to report it. And second of all, depending on what was done with his mobile device, it was taken over, and for a ransom and all that, he can actually look for a good and free decryption tool. Just make sure it's legit. Okay, make sure it's from the Normal Ransom Initiative official website. Don't go and download a decryption tool which can actually be a more powerful malware. Yeah, that was a very unintended joke, but it just came into my mind. I thought I should share that. So yeah, so basically be vigilant and make sure that it doesn't happen again. Because in maybe one mobile phone, a lot of people are like saying, "Oh, what good does it do for my mobile phone to be hacked? I've got no money in my bank, nothing for people to steal." But please, your mobile phone contains information of other people, your entire community, your entire village, right? So basically, you're not just with the people, things stolen from your mobile phone. It doesn't just affect yourself, it affects a lot of people.
Thanks, Ginny. Very important reminder. Jeffrey, do you have anything to add?
Well, I mean, Ginny said a lot of important things, so I have very little to add, but about what little I have to add has to do with, well, number one, the fact that the fan club itself is a kind of organization. It may be run by a couple of administrators, people who actually gathered the group together. And there may be certain things that they should be paying attention to in terms of content takedown. If there's something that appears on the fan club, they should exercise some degree of care, right, in looking at the kind of content that goes through. It will be very hard because it's an open platform, people post all the time. To some extent, you try and look for the social media platform to see whether there are any tools that can assist you. And so if they learn that there is now malicious content on the fan club, one of the things they should be doing also is to alert all the members as well of this. To the extent that Sam can, we should also sort of let other people know, whether from another device or through some other means of communication, that this has happened, right? So that if the content gets forwarded and and other members receive it, they will be aware and they will be they're alert as to this potential risk.
Can I also add something?
Sure.
Because while Jeff was speaking, something came to my mind and I thought I should mention this. So sometime last year, I think, otherwise it was a year before last, there was a fake social media account, well, basically it was a fake IG account on Instagram, which pretended to be me, right? So it was basically an imposter, right? And the profile picture was me. And then instead of whatever my IG handle was, it was Genie Sugene, something like that. Okay, it's definitely part of my name. So, and it looked like me. And if you click on the profile, it even had some maybe a good 10 to 20. So there was effort put in, 10 to 20 IG posts, which replicated my actual IG account. But of course, I did my duty, right? So I went to check on this because what this imposter did was it went around using my image and my name to add my friends into, or rather to message them, right? And to follow them and reach out to them after they accepted the request and to basically ask for money, exactly like Sam's case, right? And what happens is that, of course, my friends are very intelligent. They authenticate and they use their instincts. They have them and they use them. They actually then texted me on another, I think they did it through WhatsApp to check whether they did a screenshot. Is this you? Of course, then I said that, no, this is not. And we all reported it to Instagram and this profile was taken off Instagram. So it can happen. So of course, Sam needs to immediately let all his, maybe put up a public post because he wouldn't know how many of his friends were affected, right? So I think I echo what Jeff was recommending as a next step as well. Yeah.
Thanks. Let's quickly move to the next scenario. It's on deepfakes, which I think is quite a hot topic nowadays. So Emma received an email from a hacker that he has created compromising videos using her images found on the web. If she doesn't pay him, he released the photos on unsavory websites. Genie, deepfakes, as you shared, has risen in popularity. Have you observed whether there's a trend for deepfakes to be used for these purposes?
Definitely. And I'm going to use some visual aid. Everyone look at your screen, okay? And I'm going to ask our organizer to pull out one slide. I would like to share, before I go into answering the question, this momentous occasion of me receiving the Oscars. Or is it the Emmys? I don't know, whatever, some acting award, right? Obviously, I'm not clear because you know why? This is a deep fake image of me. Right? Now, I can actually put no, don't spoil it. The next one. Yes, this is the real image. Yeah, who is this? I think everyone, well, okay, for those of you who don't know, she's an award-winning actress, yeah, Michelle Yeoh, yeah. She was the one that really won the award, right? So I can tell you, it was just a 3-step action, very quick, over 2 minutes. And we got the last photo that you saw on screen just now. Okay, what happened is, let's put up the last slide. Now I put it side by side, right? Deepfake with the use of simple AI. And I'm not even a techie, like I'm not a tech geek or whatever. I don't have sophisticated tools, yeah? Basically just very simple tools. And basically, actual picture on the left, Michelle Yeoh, my random corporate photo on the right, and this software just merged both and created the image in the center, which was me. How easy is that? A click of a button, right? But how do you then identify it? Now, stay with me on this slide. Keep your eyes there. Of course, if you're more savvy, you should learn to be more savvy. Yeah, you realize that there are telltale signs of deepfake. Yeah. First of all, if you look at the image in the center, there are actually texture differences. You would notice that my face was a lot more sharp as an image, as part of the image. It's a sharper image of the face than the lower body, right? So it's different resolution. It can't be, right? So, and also contextually, if you know Genie, you know that Genie is not an actress. So even if Genie wins an award, why would Genie win an acting award, right? So you must understand what are the circumstances of your friend, of this person, of your CFO, like the finance department worker and all that. Or maybe like Uncle Ken in the story I told about Uncle Alan with my mom's help and all that. You must understand the context, the situation, and then use your instincts. I'm getting naggy, but you really have to use your instincts. So always be vigilant and of course apply your mind.
Thanks, Jeannie. Jeffrey, do you have anything to add?
Well, in terms of what I said earlier about how the laws have been filling out behind this type of risk, there are laws that sorry, the name of the person that keeps me, Emma, could look to. But obviously, in a situation like this, the time is there's a time pressure involved. There's a lot of emotions involved. It's hard to settle yourself and think about it, but there are rules, there are laws that are in place now that allow you to take down certain harmful content. If it's posted through a certain network, there are certain actions that you can take, provided you can find the person in question against them for attempting to harass you online and all that. So it basically just speaks to the fact that yes, the laws are filling out behind this situation, but it remains a principal hurdle for most people that access to justice is going to be a problem. It's just how easily can you afford a lawyer and how fast can you get to a resolution? So the answer is yes. I think I agree with everything that Genie has said. And I do add that there is some laws behind it, but there's not much you can do at present moment in terms of getting a speedy and efficient response that is cost effective. So unfortunately, there are certain limitations built into the system.
Thank you, Jeffrey. With that sobering note, let's head to the Q&A session. A reminder to our audience, you can still submit your questions through Pigeonhole. So we received a rather intriguing question, and I think because of the increase of flexi working. So an audience member asks, if I use my personal handphone number for work purposes, because I don't have a work phone, is my personal phone number still considered personal data? Maybe more for Jeffrey?
Well, there's a definition of business contact information under the PDPA, which is the information that you make available in connection with your business, effectively business contact information. So to the extent that and context matters in this regard. So if you use your phone number for business purposes, it is in fact BCI. And it does fall outside the PPA. But I always make this distinction. Say if I go to a gym to sign up and become a customer there, and they ask for a card drop so they can speed up my entrance as a customer. In that situation, I shared my office contact details not for business purposes, but for personal purposes. So the context in which that happens is it's actually, although it sits on anything, it's actually personal data. So it just means that there is a toggle switch, basically the context in which you actually use the data. So in this situation, to the extent that it is used for business purposes, it's not covered under the PPA. But to the extent that there are contexts in which it is personal information for personal domestic purposes, it would be protected.
Thanks, Jeffrey. We received another question from an audience member. They received an email from an ethical hacker, right, which said that they spotted certain vulnerabilities and they're willing to share what vulnerabilities they spotted, provided they receive compensation. So that's quite an interesting scenario. Curious about what's Genie's thoughts.
What would your instincts tell you? Sounds a bit suspect, right? Ethical hackers do exist. We call them white hackers, right? White hackers are basically people who do a lot of what we call penetration testing, security assessment, basically to help you check the robustness of your cyber security of your organization. So they do exist, and such people actually are paid salaries by legit companies to do that as a service for companies, for customers who want to test how robust the cybersecurity is and how cyber secure the employees are, right? And systemically, whether there are any loopholes or gaps that they need to stem, right, in order to become more secure as an organization. Not just for the organization itself, but also obviously for the employees and for the customers and the client database and all that. Yeah, so they do exist. I am not sure if that's a marketing tool, but I genuinely wouldn't pay money for someone who just comes and makes such claims because they may be false unless you show me something, you show me a proof, right? And also I don't know the source. It's not clear also from the question what the source is. I'm not sure where this person, I wouldn't know this person from Adam, right? So would you trust someone that you don't know from Adam? You wouldn't, right? So I would only trust a trusted source. Even if they say that I would say that, maybe you can report it to the authority, or if this is to do with my company property, I would say that, well, you can write an email to my IT department to report this, and well, I'll leave it to the company to decide whether or not they want to pay the ethical hacker. But at least we will have the systems in place to check on the legitimacy, right? So again, I'm sorry if I don't offer a lot of variety in terms of solutions, because really it goes back always to A and I, authenticate and to use your instincts, right? Because that's something that I feel is still lacking. And obviously we always walk right into traps because we do not authenticate, or we don't trust our instincts, or we don't use them. Yeah.
Thanks, Jeannie. So here we have another question, maybe more for Jeffrey, as it touches more on contracts. So I think the audience member hears about PDPA, cybersecurity attacks, but very often they are not quite the ones who are the ones holding or storing all these online information. Typically, they'll have a service provider. However, because very commonly they don't really have bargaining power, so all these service providers, they have huge exclusion liability or responsibility for any hacks, etc. So do you have any practical tips on that? Can they rely on the Unfair Contract Terms Act?
Okay, that's an interesting one. So first of all, recognize that certain legislation like the PPA isn't legislation you can contract out of, right? So the fact that they may make certain exclusions, there is in fact still at the end of the day a statutory liability linked to them having to meet certain standards which are imposed by law, not by contract. So attempts to exclude liability are not necessarily effective. The other point is that obviously there may be a disconnect between what the contracts actually say and what the companies actually do. The more reputable companies will do their best to protect themselves, but they will also, if they're good companies, taking appropriate steps to, take action to, well, firstly, beef up the security standards that they have, but also to some extent, they'll be more accountable in different ways. So the contract is really probably one of a number of things that forms the entire basis of the relationship. Unfortunately, it's just that lawyers being lawyers, right? We tend to protect our clients the most. So the endless drafting of exclusions are always going to be there, right? But at the end of the day, I think when you make an assessment of whether to contract with somebody, take a holistic assessment. Who are they? Do they have reputations to uphold? Are they a responsible organization? Do they have a good track record, and so on? It's a holistic thing. The contract certainly is a big part of it. But if you can't influence the contract, then make decisions based on everything else around it as well. Because it's a full assessment that you should undertake yourself personally.
Have you observed any insurance that might be available for such purposes?
Well, there's cyber insurance for organizations. I personally haven't seen any. Well, I personally am not aware of cyber insurance for the individual. And I suspect the difficulty here really is, how do you insure an individual unless the person first satisfies an insurer that they themselves are personally adopting the right cyber hygiene and all that. So it's a business at the end of the day. All insurance needs to be placed. All insurance bets need to be placed intelligently. So I haven't come across a product that's for personal individuals, but yes, there's cyber insurance for organizations.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Next question is for Jeannie. It's two questions. So first is, can the audience member form the observation that a PC is safer than a handphone to be hacked? And the next question is, after hearing all the horror stories, they're asking, is there any tips on how you can actually...
I'm sorry I scared you. Yeah.
Is there any tips that you can share on how to make your handphone safer and prevent it from being hacked?
Sure. Yeah. Let's say this on record. I'm sorry I scared you. That's not my intention, or maybe it is. I think The first question, whether a PC is safer. As a very conservative lawyer, I'll tell you, it depends, right? Really, it depends, really, because it depends on which you use more. Just because in my observation, based on user behavior and trends, I feel that more people are using, and that's what the statistics show anyway, more people are using mobile devices rather than desktops. I therefore make the assumption that we need to be very vigilant, especially for mobile devices, because there's so much screen time on mobile devices, right? So that's natural. However, if you are a person who uses the desktop or your laptop or even your notebooks, right? Your mobile tablets, for that matter, whatever the device you're using most often, and stores personal data of yours and others, or access mobile banking applications, then obviously those will become your most vulnerable and potentially easily more vulnerable and more risky devices, right? So it depends. But I would say that generally, also, whether or not it's more risky depends on how much security you place on it, right? So if you live in HDB flats as opposed to a landed house, does it mean that because the HDB flat is high rise, it's less accessible, it is safer than a landed house, which is like well landed, right? As the name suggests, but if you live in a landed house and you've got CCTV cameras and double lock and your gate is locked and everything, your doors are also padlocked, but you live in an HDB flat, but you're leaving your door open with no grill, obviously, and your windows are also open, obviously, it makes no difference. I'm not sure if this is a good enough analogy, but I think you get my drift. So it depends, right? The second question was,
Is there any tips on how to protect your health?
yes, I think I already alluded to it, so I'll repeat it, however, so please do take notes, yeah? Number one, I would installing my device, whatever it may be, mobile or desktop, definitely with a baseline level of security. That's like putting one lock, right? Which is to have an antivirus software, a good one, right? That provides updates all the time. And please, after installing, you do need to go to your Google Play Store or your Apple Store to frequently enough to update your software, because if you don't update your software, it no longer protects you from new bugs. It's not going to be useful anyway, right? Worse still is a white elephant and you think you're protected, but you're not. That's bad. So you have to install an antivirus software, a good one. And second, keep it updated. Third, if you are accessing, say, some free Wi-Fi, which I generally don't advocate doing, because when you use a free public access Wi-Fi, it's susceptible to the network being hacked into and it affects its users, right? But if you really have to, please make sure that you have a VPN service as well. It's really not costly, right? It'll be cheaper than your chili crab. Okay, I promise you. So I'm a foodie and I just had some chili crab over the weekend, so I'm quite excited about it. So you should subscribe to a VPN service and make sure you switch on your VPN. VPN basically stands for Virtual Private Network, which therefore means that when you switch on your VPN, it masks your identity from potential hackers, right? Who tap into the network that they hacked into, the public free Wi-Fi, whatever network, okay? So when you switch that on, at least it gives you some level of protection. It's like putting another lock, right? And of course, fourth, I can go on forever. I mean, if this webinar lasts for 5 hours, I could take up all that time, but I think I'm going to be expelled from further sessions in future years. So I'll keep it short. The last one is really, I think you must make sure that you password protect all your devices. So there are a lot of times, I always nag at my friends. They would be, clicking away on their phones and then they put it down and they go and order coffee. The screen is on. They don't even lock their screen, right? Now you lock the screen and then it's password protected. At least there's another lock at the door, right? And then after that, you should also password protect your apps, your applications. if those are available for the particular application, right? And also, a lot of times we do a lot of shopping online as well, e-commerce, right? You would have your Shopee, Lazada, whatever. I should stop making advertisements for them, but you do not get my drift, right? All the shopping apps. You would have your financial information stored there, do you, or do you not? If you do, I strongly suggest that you remove it right now. I know it's a hassle, but every time you make a purchase, no matter how small, just key in the information all over again, right? Because if you store your credit card information, what are you doing? You're basically placing and trusting your personal financial information and placing them at the hands of someone else, right? And your security, the security of your personal data and your financial information is dependent on this third-party website, this vendor, this e-commerce site, or whatever it is, to safeguard for you, right? Why would you want to do that, right? So just have to don't do the remember information or the remember password. Always remember, don't click on that. I know it's tempting because we want convenience, but resist that temptation. Okay, so I think I'll stop there.
Thanks, Jeannie. I think we only have time for one more question. So just, I think, summarizing quite a number of questions on this topic. I think there's a little bit of concern around, cybersecurity, as well as loss of personal data. So for Jeffrey, I think they're quite curious about what are the penalties for PDPA breach or for cybersecurity hack. The other question is there such a concept of class action lawsuit? Because typically if there's a cybersecurity hack or there's a PDPA loss, normally affects many individuals. And sometimes it's very hard to calculate what the damages would be. So what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so there is a penalty, administrative penalty, that you can be levied up to. So there's the ceilings were, I think, up to 10% of your Singapore turnover, which is a percentage of your, actual turnover that is attributed to Singapore. And so it's not a small amount. It can be a lot depending on the size of the breach itself. Of course, the size of the actual amount being levied, it's not a fixed amount. It's a variable amount. And what happens is the PDPC assesses the gravity of the breach, the severity, number of individuals, and so on. There are a number of metrics that go into it. And it's not completely a science. In terms of class action lawsuit, we don't, I think, have anything as formalized as a class action lawsuit procedure here in Singapore. Or if there is, I'm not aware of it. But there certainly is case law that tells you that there is financial value associated with the loss of the disposal of your personal data. It is possible to place monetary value to it. Again, it's not a scientific thing. And you can, of course, if there's certain commonalities, I believe, in certain cases, you can actually, to some extent, limited extent, have common cause against a particular defendant. But nothing as formalized as you see in other countries.
Thanks, Jeffrey. So sadly, we've run out of time. So we have a little bit of time to perhaps for each of our panelists to share one key takeaway or more in Jeannie's case. Jeannie, would you like to go first?
How did you guess I was going to give more? I like to over-deliver. So, Madam Moderator asked for one, I'll give you two. Okay? Number one, of course, I've said this to death, but I'll try to say it in another way so that it sounds fresh. Be vigilant, right? I think read up because we do need to keep ourselves abreast of current trends, right? Cyber attackers and fraudsters are increasingly sophisticated and savvy. So we need to really match that standard. Otherwise, we'll be very easily falling into their traps and the new modus operandi, right? So be alert to these trending methodologies of cyber criminals. They are constantly evolving. So remember what I said about the pet feeders, the bubble tea, the wedding invites, and how easy it is to create a deep fake. Remember the image of Genie receiving an acting award. You can only prevent or avoid what you know, right? So because otherwise you don't know what you don't know. So and you can never, therefore, effectively prevent something you don't even know exists. So I have mentioned, educate yourself through storybooks, through reading out of news, things, whatever. And second takeaway, of course, on ransomware, I think it bears repeating. God forbid, I really don't wish this on anyone, but if it does unfortunately affect you, do not pay the ransom. Okay? I think I'll stop there.
Thanks, Genie. I'd like to hand over to Jeffrey for his key takeaway.
Okay, those are really good takeaways. I also offer two, not as good as Jeannie's, but the first one is apathy is going to be your worst enemy, apathy and indifference, right? So it dovetails to what Jeannie was saying about staying on top of it. You do need to be actively concerned, right? So read the T's and C's that you see, your privacy policy, investigate the platforms that you have. What are the solutions or the options and settings you can choose? The second message is really, it's not just about you. It's also about your friends, the people that your loved ones, anyone who might in turn be fooled by you, by a deepfake of you, for example, or you become potentially a weak point, right, to the safety of others. So, it's just making sure that you understand that it's not just about you, it's about your community, about your loved ones as well.
Thanks, Jeffrey. So that brings us to the end of our Q&A session. On Wednesday, 2nd October, same time at 7:30 p.m. is our next webinar on combating pollution towards a greener and better Singapore. Do you know what you should do with packaging waste after you have finished your takeaway meal? What are the laws governing retailers of electronic goods when it comes to e-waste? Join us for an enlightening talk on Singapore's environmental regulations focusing on pollution, recycling, and waste management. Discover what businesses must do to control pollution and their responsibilities in managing hazardous waste and your rights as consumers. In this year of public hygiene, learn about laws and regulations affecting waste management, pollution, and how you can do your part towards a cleaner and greener Singapore. Join us this Wednesday as our moderators Sean and speakers Irene and Min Yi as they discuss how you can be better informed about your rights and responsibilities, fostering a community that is knowledgeable and proactive in environmental sustainability. This and many more webinars are part of Law Awareness Weeks at CDC 2024. You can visit the website, go to gov.sg/law-CDC or Pro Bono SG website or LawGoWare to register for this webinar or many more webinars available. The links will be dropped into the chat function for your easy reference. At the end of this webinar, a survey form, as with most things nowadays, will pop up on your screen for your completion. We appreciate your comments as it will help us improve future webinars. Lastly, after today's fantastic sharing from our panelists, and if you find that you might need legal guidance on any legal issue, please do write to help@probono.sg. Lastly, but not least, we would like to thank Jeffrey and Genie, and I'm sure you'll join us in appreciation for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and experiences with us. So with that, on behalf of Pro Bono SG, we would like to thank all of you for joining us today and have a good week ahead. Bye.